Great, hello and welcome to the third Blue Light Communication Hub webinar. Firstly, my apologies for missing last week. I have watched the recording. I was really impressed with everyone on there, and very impressed with the work that Police Scotland have done. Now, as you probably all are aware at the moment, the Blue Light Comms Hub is designed to give an insight into how to tackle some real-life issues for which comms and the world we're involved in can have a massive impact. All of this content is important, but this week's content is of very special importance, of violence against domestic women and domestic abuse. That's of course being reinforced by the government's promise to halve the prevalence of violence against women and girls within a decade. And it's a subject that I have some professional connection with before the government really started getting involved. So as with ever, you in the public sector have great advantage. You have the advantage of the sharing of learning, the sharing of information, and the sharing of work that you've undertaken. So please share this webinar, share the invite, discuss it, feel free to ask questions. Let's get that conversation going. I'm Martin Metcalf. I was a police officer for 15 years. I'm now the Blue Light Comms lead with CAN. I've got experience of being on the beat Bobby, a detective, an intel analyst, and a leader within the police service. Now, more specific to this subject, I've worked for several years on the eastern side of West Midlands Police, working as an STO, a sexual offences trained officer, in RASO and CSC. And for those who are not familiar with police's prevalence to shorten everything to acronyms, that's rape and serious sexual offences and child sexual exploitation work. Eventually, with that, specialising in an operation via a very small diversion to Operation U-Tree at the time, but an operation to combat grooming gangs in Coventry and Solihull. And that's when I first did a successful collaboration with CAN, and the first of many through my my police career. And I'd say that of all my work in the police, one of the most challenging areas was that of domestic violence. As a police officer, trying to reach that burden of proof, sometimes with unsupported victims, and that's a word I'll come back to in a bit. And it's an area, unlike a lot of policing, where safeguarding is often more important than a criminal prosecution and a what was termed at the time a successful criminal justice outcome. So it is, as I'm sure everyone's aware, a really sensitive subject, especially from a communications point of view. There can be some significant unintended consequences, which I think we'll go into in a bit during the course of the webinar. But successful communications will likely result in an increase in reporting. So that's a question on how we measure success, how do we report success out into the general public consciousness, and do we as a service, as a council, as social services, are there the resources in place to deal with that potential increase in reporting? There are prompting, it may prompt dangerous interventions. It has the potential of enthusing people to intervene and tackle when they are probably not best placed to do that, which then kind of potentially leads on to endangering victims, people being potentially too quick to intervene, or the support isn't in place, or it escalates the situation, or we may end up actually failing to address the perpetrator behaviour. And this is where I come back to the word unsupportive, which is, in all honesty, a word that we used at the time, but I think that in retrospect, it really puts the onus on the victim. It's almost a form of victim blaming, which is an easy trap for us to fall into. Yeah, you go along the lines of saying, if you've been a victim, or you as a victim need to watch out for these signs. So I think we must be conscious on who we're providing the communication message to. And that's leading on nicely to I'm really happy to hand over to Sarah Archer from Surrey, who's very graciously decided very graciously here today. She's going to share a campaign that she's developed tackling specific coercive and controlling behaviours. Sarah, please.
Thanks very much, Martin. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Archer from Surrey County Council. I'm the comms account manager, working with, and I also work alongside the community safety team, so that we can make sure that I work alongside them with our domestic abuse campaigns. Thanks very much. Firstly, I just wanted to, this campaign follows on from a series of campaigns we've done around coercive and controlling behaviour. So looking at things around financial control, monitoring and isolation. And these are some of the creatives that we used to explain to people and highlight the types of abuse that people might be experiencing. But what we wanted to do is we set out with our objectives at the start of the campaign, looking at how we educate people about the language they use around domestic abuse, and how we can educate people to know how important it was. And Martin just talked a little bit about victim blaming and how using the right language and supporting people in the right way when they disclose domestic abuse can have a real impact on people. I mean, in the worst circumstances, that can have a really detrimental effect. You know, when people are thinking about leaving an abusive situation, so we have to be really careful. This was a big behaviour change piece. It was really a bit of an attitudinal shift as far as people using language and trying to educate people. And when we looked at the brief, it was really difficult to figure out how we would make all of the people in Surrey consider how they talk to people if they did disclose domestic abuse to them, or if they were in a relationship where they were experiencing it. And we targeted this campaign, and it was really around friends and family, but also people experiencing abuse. Our target audience was slightly younger, so that we sort of put a slightly more emphasis on the 18 to 35-year-olds, and then we also did a slightly wider awareness across on our older people as well, to ensure that we captured as many people as possible. And that was male and female. That wasn't women. We wanted men to engage with this content as well. So what we created was some little quizzes that we put out, asking people if they saw somebody experiencing these situations, how confident would they be in dealing with the situation or advising people. And what we did within those little questionnaires, we put some right and wrong answers, so we could try and direct people to the right language they should be using when talking to people. So it would be with the three different areas, so financial, isolation and monitoring. We had different questions in there, and when people answered the right questions, obviously we moved on, and incorrect, we would give them some advice about how they might tackle it. At the beginning of the questionnaire, we asked them how confident they felt in helping people in this situation, and at the end of the questionnaire, after they've answered the questions and they'd read a bit more about solutions, it would then show them whether they felt, and then we'd ask them whether they felt more confident afterwards to tackle this situation. And over 60% of people said they were more confident after completing these questionnaires in how to speak to people about domestic abuse. So we've had over 1,200 people complete these questionnaires so far, with over 13,000 clicks through to them. And this also, after this, people can also go through to, we have a dedicated web page on Healthy Surrey, and they can also find out more information about wider support for domestic abuse, and looking at how people can be supported across Surrey with the agencies that we work with. This campaign was actually, we worked together with partners to develop this campaign. There's a Surrey Against Domestic Abuse partnership, which includes police, local domestic abuse charity, Surrey County Council, and health partners. So it was a collaborative approach that we took to this, and the development of the campaign and the language we used. The questionnaires went through our domestic abuse partnership to make sure we were using the correct language and taking from user experience experience to make sure that we weren't using any incorrect language and that we were directing people in the right way. And so overall, we feel this has been a really, really big success. So it was a huge challenge. How do you create an attitudinal shift in residents in Surrey around domestic abuse? But we know now that we've got over 1,200 people and more. This is an ongoing campaign that we're continuing, that will be that have completed the questionnaires and are more confident in the way that they talk to people. So we're really happy with the way that it's the campaign has run, and I think it's something that is suitable for other organisations to take on board. It's quite shareable. It's you know, we've had really good success there, and we're really pleased with the way it's performed, with the support of Can Digital, obviously, who helped us to work through the best way to tackle the objectives that we had around this campaign. So yeah, that's sort of a bit about our campaign that we've run in Surrey. It's continuing to run through paid search at the moment, and that was the intention. We did a big push in November around White Ribbon Day and 16 days of activism, and then we're continuing with a sort of a smaller budget to continue all the way to the end of March. But yeah, so we have that always on kind of approach with this campaign.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. Thank you very much. I agree. You claim it's a really big success. I'd say 60% improvement in people's confidence in tackling domestic abuse is a really big success. You spoke at the end about ready to share. So how can other councils and other agencies adopt or learn from this piece of work that you've done?
I think it's been really targeted about the messaging that we put out, and giving people examples has helped. And I think that the work that we've done as far as the assets and the way that they've been created, I think they can be used by different organisations through Can. So if they contact JP to discuss how they might use it. But yeah. Yeah,
okay, so those assets and the process is all available. That's excellent. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think that naturally hands on to JP, who's got some insights and tactics and examples from around the UK on this subject.
Campaign, and yeah, as Sarah says, being able to switch that approach on wherever you are. Surrey have agreed to make that approach licensable, and this licensing idea is something which I think is powerful, because it will enable campaigns to sustain each other and for us to save money on developing campaigns in the future as well. But I wanted to share some insight and some examples from other parts of the UK. Firstly, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Orlo platform, but they have a brilliant tool that enables listening across a whole range of different platforms. So before you act and before you design communications, you'll be able to look at what people are talking about in any sort of given subject area across a whole range of platforms, including even things like Nextdoor, obviously X, Meta, and other platforms, and understand, what are people talking about in your area, and then understanding who in your area they're hearing about from. So who on social media in your area is influential on the subject of violence against women and girls and so on. And this can help you identify a number of really useful points. Who's influential, what is being consumed in the environment that you're about to communicate with, and what is being talked about, and also what isn't being talked about. And the platform can also really cleverly analyze the language being used to give you an indication of sentiment, and also to give you an indication of trust in your organization and trust in the key influences in that area. So in terms of understanding the landscape under which you operate, it's really, really powerful. And so Can are partnering with Orlo and also eShot to be that sort of full insight, amplification and nurture function. And so I believe many police forces, many fire authorities have the ability to use this tool, as do many councils. So always think about that as a start of a 10. Another really useful insight approach is to look at what people are searching for in your area. And so this enables you to understand in a similar way to social, what are people actively looking for? Search is really an extension of many people's thought processes now. We think about things and then we go to our phones and type them in. Sometimes we don't even realize we've searched for something and then wonder why ads are popping up around that subject. It's so connected with what with how we think. But it enables you to see what's on people's minds, the terminology they're using, but also the terminology they're not using. Sometimes we have professional terms and phrases which aren't used by the public. And so search is really good at grounding what people are actually thinking about. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of what some search insight could look at. We have a tool which anyone in the Blue Light Hub is allowed to email us and ask us anything, and we'll find data from your area. At the moment, we're just looking at London. But what you can do is you can drill into the last 3 years of search term volume around specific subjects to understand what is on people's minds, and are there any trends, or are there any uplifts? And you can see when those things happen. So it's fascinating looking at this, maybe for vaccination or for cost of living. But you can also look in terms of what terms are on people's minds. So here we've got terms where people are asking things, terms like gaslighting, controlling behaviour, manipulative behaviour, trauma bombing, love bombing, blame shifting. You can see here that gaslighting is a really high number, maybe because it's an emerging term. It's come into the popular parlance more recently, but you can see it stays really high up the search volumes. This is just for London, but you could look at UK or in your area. And it helps us understand what's on people's minds, but also we can see that financial controlling behaviour just doesn't really register here. So it might be that, as Sarah's tackling in Surrey, the level of awareness around that particular sort of controlling behaviour isn't very high. And so it helps you set parameters for what you might need to increase awareness of, but also helps guide language as to what you might be able to see. So as I said, if you're interested in this and you want to look at these sorts of stats for your area, do drop me a line, and we're happy to do reports for you for free wherever you are. I'm just going to hop back to this. Now, I wanted to show some good examples from other parts of the UK. Sarah has been using search, and many other organisations are starting to do that too. This was a campaign run in Milton Keynes, where whenever someone types in an array of terms that we might have identified in the insight, we're then able to place ads alongside that encourage people to engage with services and support in a safe way, so that when people are typing these terms in, an ad can pop up that then nudges them towards, it can be a third sector organisation, it can be directly to you. It can also trigger opening a browser in incognito mode, so that if they're in a situation where someone might be controlling their phone or access to their phone, anything that's looked at or interacted with won't be measurable on that device afterwards. So there are lots of neat and always on activities that you can be doing, so that you put the message in front of people at the right place at the right time. That's so important, because dramatically increasing awareness of something is quite expensive. You have to have a lot of people consuming and processing information, many of whom probably aren't quite exactly in that window in order to support somebody, or maybe in need of support themselves. So these tactics are proving to be or proving to enable you to intercept online need, demand, intent, and nudge it towards the right kinds of services. And so that sort of thinking around a campaign as being an always-on mechanism to connect people with support is something that we're really pushing and recommending and promoting. Also, one thing that happens, unfortunately, not frequently enough, is the targeting of perpetrator behaviour. Now, there are these two videos which will be in the slides, which we'll share after this, developed by Police Scotland, that start to address and tackle grooming and identify grooming behaviours. But then they partnered with an organisation called Stop It Now, which gave perpetrators or people who identified those behaviours in themselves a path away or path out of those kinds of behaviours. Now, this is not common enough, I think, in these kinds of campaigns, and it is something that we should insist on and get better at doing. It's tricky to address, but it is absolutely essential in terms of prevention and long-term prevention that you help perpetrators identify not only that they have that behaviour and maybe leave them stuck in it, but also give them a way out. There was another element to this campaign about consumption of child pornography online, and again connecting these men with a service which would help them go through a set of processes to get them out of that position. And there were videos talking about the behaviours and what it looks like, so people could understand the trigger points, but also there were conversations with men who'd been through that process, which I think again is really important for prevention and also addressing perpetrators. And this specific campaign, while it was running, increased calls to the helpline by 30% compared to the preceding 6 weeks, and also online chat users, so anonymous online chat, delivered a 25% increase as well. So if you imagine each one of those conversations leading to a perpetrator probably being walked away from dangerous situations, that is a really important part of communications and campaigning. So just to sort of sum up, I think when we talk about VWG and domestic violence campaigns, we're moving away from sort of sporadic, untargeted, unmeasurable campaigns, much more towards right place, right time, right audiences targeted campaigns that run always on. So by being targeted, you can say to these audiences constantly, and then also make sure that you can reduce cost per outcome, whether it's a member of the public being made more confident about intervening in situations of coercion and control, or reducing the cost of someone making a call to a third sector organisation that can then support them either away from a dangerous situation or out of dangerous behaviours that are likely to create future danger. And in terms of content, the victim sort of messaging or messages to victims should almost be the third, or if ever, on your list. And we should be creating content that's much more perpetrator and community targeted. I think with landing pages and user experience, everything needs to be simplified massively to make sure that it's accessible, that it's translatable, that people in high stress situations are able to understand that they're safe, protected, and understand what the next step should be. And also I believe on the content front that rather than innovating in isolation or reinventing the wheel each time, we should share and use each other's resources more. We're seeing this happen in smoking cessation. We're seeing it happen in foster care recruitment, and particularly with really tricky, sensitive areas. Getting the content right and then sharing it with everybody will mean that everyone has more tested, more proven content, which will help drive performance in their campaigns. So that's hopefully some sort of insight tools, some examples of what works well, and some trends about maybe what we can stop doing and start doing to make campaigns work better.
Great, thanks, JP. Again, real results, making a real impact and real engagement. I think today we've discussed an interesting new approach, or certainly an interesting approach on tackling the perpetrators. We saw that with the child abuse images in Police Scotland, and the work that Sarah's been doing as well. JP, so, just a quick question for me: how quickly can we get a campaign up and running?
If you have the content ready to go, it's a matter of days, really. The tactics exist. It's just about switching the appropriate amplification on in whatever geography you have. I would suggest, though, that rushing, it often increases the risk of waste. So sometimes taking time to do proper insight, particularly speaking to the services that support victims, and also that can support perpetrators away, and understanding the nuances of the messaging around that is very, very important. Making sure that what you're doing is designed to keep privacy and control and protection of users paramount. Again, very, very important. So delaying go live for a few weeks to get all that stuff right is thoroughly recommended. Yeah. Unfortunately, these challenges aren't going away. And when it's a behavioural challenge and the complex problems, slow, low, and always on is the way to go, and develop a kind of playbook for what works wherever you are. But in theory, if it was urgent or an emergency, you can switch activity on if you have all the messaging in, within 24 hours, and have it 100% of the target market seeing it multiple times within about 2 days. I would suggest, though, that this is a longer game, as you can see Sarah is doing down in Surrey.
JP and I and James from Turn the Page, it always opens conversations with talk about behavioural change in anything, and campaigns in anything. So there's nothing more for me to do than to just thank everyone for their time on this webinar, and a special thank you to the presenters. And as with ever, we will share a recording and the slides presented today. So thanks very much, everyone.